Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. Just doing my weekly newsletter for the 2nd of August 2019. In this newsletter I'm giving you a wee preview of the Gaelic language. I found a very good book with some great Gaelic stories in it. Of course, because I can't speak Gaelic, and I dare say most of you that are listening to this can't either, we won't be able to read them. But I'm kind of hoping that maybe someone out there knows someone that can speak Gaelic and might get them to persuade them to maybe translate some of the stories for us and send them in. And if they do, obviously I'll be very happy to acknowledge them and put them up. But I also wanted to highlight the fact that I've given you a link to our Gaelic page, where pretty well everything on that page is in the Gaelic language, or some of them actually give you English translations as well. But the thing is, on there are two videos. One is actually a very first video where they teach you to sing in the Gaelic language. And there's a very nice woman that's actually singing the first one to us, and the way she goes through it, I think it's actually very simple, but there's a lot of repetitive stuff in it, which makes it easier to remember. And I think she does a great job. But I noticed in the comments, there's quite a few people saying, could you give us a translation, please? But obviously they're not reading the comments, so no one's given us a translation. So it'd be great if someone out there could send me in a translation, English translation of it. That'd be really helpful. And I've also highlighting the other video that I've got up on that page, which is from Nova Scotia, where a lot of people still do speak Gaelic. And I didn't realise it because obviously being in Gaelic, I didn't think I would bother listening to the whole thing, but it looked really interesting, that's why I put it up. But this time around I decided to play it again, and just to get a better feel for what was all in it. And then I discovered that there is in fact some English, spoken English in the video, which is explaining how the Gaelic language came to be in Nova Scotia and the fight to preserve it, or to bring it back in some cases. So I thought I'd just highlight that to you, because you might enjoy that, in fact, because I certainly enjoyed it. Okay, so having highlighted that, I'm now on to the news items I've picked for you this week. The first story is funding model should be made clearer, say MPs. Said the method by which Scottish Government funding is calculated should be made more transparent, a Westminster committee has recommended. Essentially, this is to do with the Barnett formula, that it is a bit complex, and what they're saying is, could you not make it simpler for people to at least understand how it's calculated? And I thought it was a good article, so I thought I'd put that up for you to read. The next story is a more prosperous UK outside the EU. This is a John Redwood's diary article. It says, one of the important wins will be to resume our full voting membership of the World Trade Organization. Then the next story is Boris Johnson is off to a flying start after crushing Jeremy Corbyn in the first meeting in Parliament. Said the glum faces of Labour MPs revealed it all as Boris Johnson went head to head with Jeremy Corbyn for the first time and crushed him underfoot. Wow. So that's from the Sun newspaper, and they give you a video of the play-by-play on that one. Next is from the BBC. It says, Alistair Jack, what do we know about the new Scottish Secretary? It said Alistair Jack is a relative newcomer to Westminster, having been first elected in the 2017 snap election. So as he's going to be the Scottish Secretary, I thought you might want to learn a bit about him. Then the next story is, how should the UK change its foreign policy once out of the EU? This is another John Redwood article, but basically it says, once we're out of the EU, the UK regains its vote and voice in world bodies. And to be frank with you, that's one of the major reasons I wanted to leave. Because I thought, we keep being run by the EU and having to accept their policies. And I just don't think that's right. I was always in favour of the common market. But when we get into political decisions and everything like that, I just think it's all wrong that we should kowtow. I mean, it's like, Scotland always complains about Westminster running it, although to be honest with you, I think it would be a hell of a lot worse for Brussels to run Scotland, which was what will happen if Scotland gets independent and rejoins the EU. Frankly, I think it's just ridiculous. Anyway, but that's just my opinion. Okay, another one is in pictures this time. Langholm Common Riding. Says Langholm has held its annual common riding event around the borders of the Dumfries and Galloway town. Frankly, there's some lovely pictures there, so I hope you'll enjoy looking at those. Then, next story is why a US-UK trade deal ought to mean us finally getting some sense from Brussels. And as I got a lot of American readers of the newsletter, I thought you might be interested in that. It says Prime Minister Boris Johnson has already made it clear he will urgently look for a trade deal with President Trump. The next story I have for you is what I learned from Canada about legalizing cannabis. It says, despite legislation, many Canadians still buy cannabis on the black market. So I think this helps you understand how Canada's dealing with all that. And I thought it was a really good article, actually. Okay, let's transform UK agriculture is another John Redwood story this week. It says, all the time we've been in the EU, the Common Agricultural Policy has kept the UK under controls which have not suited us. And I know quite a lot of people are concerned about the agricultural system, but so again, I thought that was a good story. The next article is the London Stock Exchange is turning away from Europe and endorsing global Britain. Said the LSE's latest deal is a huge vote of confidence in London as a financial centre. The next story, Brexit opportunity to correct farm funding failings. This is from the BBC Scotland, would you believe? MPs on Westminster's Scottish Affairs Committee said leaving the EU presented a chance to address failings in the current formula. I mean, to be honest, I never trust the BBC on anything to do with Brexit, but I thought, well, that might be of interest to you. Then, education experts say children are reaping the benefits of a boom in early learning centres held in countryside and parks. It says in the past 10 years, Scotland has experienced a boom in outdoor nurseries, which see children aged 3 and up spend the majority of all of the day learning in the countryside and parks. This is about nurseries, and I haven't done a lot, but I was out getting my hair cut the other day, and I asked a couple of women that were in the hairdressers about whether kids get outdoors nursery education in Canada, and they weren't aware of it. So I need to follow that up really. But anyway, it's a really good article, and it came from the Sunday Post, which often does some excellent articles, I have to say. So I hope you might want to have a wee read at that, especially if you've got young kids around the place. The next story is the Irish backstop is a shameless threat to the UK's integrity. It must be ditched. It's extraordinary that rejecting the partition of the UK is portrayed as hard line. This is from CapX, so again, a really good story there. Johnson has the inestimable advantage of a divided opposition. Says the best news yesterday for Boris Johnson was written by Tony Blair's former Director of Communications, Alistair Campbell. And then the final story I picked up, which just came in this morning, is the Asian century is over. It said, beset by conflicts, stagnating economies and political troubles, the region no longer looks set to rule the world. I do know that whenever I talk about global trade, I've never really mentioned China, because to me, I don't think the Chinese offer a very good future for us. But I did think India, perhaps, and the Commonwealth countries did. So again, I thought this might well be an interesting article for you to peruse. Okay, so that's the news stories I've picked for you this week. Electric Canadian is the next section. The Canadian Horticulturalist, volume 36, 1913, is up and available, so we're almost at the start of the First World War here. Next one I've got is Canadian Poets, chosen and edited by John W. Garvin. He's a BA, and this was produced in 1916. It's a biography and examples of their poems. So if you like poetry, this can be read on the site now. And I found another one, Oatmeal and the Catechism, Scottish Gaelic Settlers in Quebec by Margaret Bennett. It was produced in 1998. This book can actually be borrowed from the Internet Archive. So I've given you a link to the Internet Archive's page where you can borrow the book. I borrowed it for a day and had a bit of a read through. There's certainly some fascinating information in there. So I hope that might be of interest and you get around to borrowing the book. I mind if you borrow it, try and read it fast so that you can give it back and other people can borrow it again. Right, 5 years development of machine tools in Canada by G.C. Keith, who's a Bachelor of Science. Again, a rather interesting book, that one. And then The Canadian Railroader. The circulation of the magazine is devoted to the Canadian Railroad Men. This is volume 1. And might I remind you that if you go to our magazine page, where I'm listing all these magazines, I've actually got a link to the Internet Archive where you can read more copies of that. If you enjoy the first issue, then hopefully you'll want to read more. Then I found another one, Montreal Origins, came from the Canadian Historical magazine. It's Nico O'Bomsewin of the Abenaki First Nations shares some of the history of the First Nations that have been established in the Montreal area for centuries. English subtitles are available in this film, and I've given you a link to where you can view it. And then finally, Canadian Magazine. I've highlighted this before, but I actually found volume 1, and as I maybe mentioned to you, whenever I find a magazine, I like to try and get hold of the first volume, because usually that tells you, they set out the stall in the first issue, normally telling you about what their plans are for the magazine going forward, and I always think that's valuable information. I will say the book's a bit fuzzy. It's not really a good copy, but I was able to run it through an OCRing program I have here, and it actually did a very good job of OCRing it in. So I've given you that introduction to the publication within our magazines section, and I've given you a link to that as well. Okay, so Electric Scotland we're on to, and I've given you Scottish Eccentrics by Hugh MacDiarmid. The distinguished Scottish poet and literary critic who writes this book recalls how Bernard Shaw in On the Rocks ironically declares that the massacres after the Battle of Culloden were not murder but simply liquidation, since the slain Scots in question were incompatible with British civilization. He then surveys the whole field of Scottish biography and shows how true this is proved of an amazing number of distinguished Scots, no matter how successful the bulk of the Scottish people have been assimilated to English standards as the Union. The facts are irresistible and bring out the eccentricity of Scottish genius in extraordinary fashion. As the author gives full-length studies often outstanding Scottish eccentrics, including Lord George Gordon of the Gordon Riots, Sir Thomas Urquhart, the translator of Rabelais, Christopher North of Sion, James Macpherson MP, James Hogg, the Ettrick Shepherd, and William McGonagall, perhaps the world's best bad poet. But he supports these leading cases with apt material drawn from the lives of hundreds of Scots of every period in history and every walk of life, and in this way it builds up a brilliant panoramic picture of Scottish psychology through the ages, singularly at variance with all generally accepted views of the national character. So, really brilliant book that, so I hope you'll enjoy that. And then Discovering Scotland with the Reader's Digest. This is a video, and it's 1 hour 46 minutes in playing time, and I've given you a link because it's on the Internet Archive. So I've given you a link to that so you can click on it there and watch it. And there is a link where you can make it full screen, because it's kind of small otherwise. Okay, then the next one is Harry Gordon, entertainer. This came from Stan Bruce. He discovered him. I hadn't heard of him myself, but Stan Bruce made me aware of this person and sent me some info on him, which I've been able to add a sound clip and a picture. So thanks to Stan for that, and I've given you a link where you can read about him. Then Best Newfangled Family Tree, I got in section 1 of the August 2019 edition. So a good reads there, lots of good stuff as usual with Beth. Then I got the Hilton newsletter. So this newsletter covers his trip to Iceland, and I've given you a link so you can have a read at it and view all the pictures he's included. Then I was having a chat with Patricia on an email cycle, and she was talking about Good Words 1860, because she was trying to find out if someone had done the book, gosh, I forgot the name of the book now. But anyway, it's the Home Preacher is what it's called, yes. And she was trying to ask me, she said, you didn't put all of the 1860 edition up, and I wondered if in the balance of the book there is anything on the Home Preacher, and I have had a look through it and there isn't. But as I was going through it, I found a couple of articles in it that again I hadn't put up, and I thought I'm going to put them up now because I think they're worthwhile reading. One is The Massacre of Christians in Syria. And bearing in mind this is published in 1860, gives you some background why he thinks why the attitude to Christians has developed. So I put that up, and also the other one I put up was the Lord's Prayer, which is quite a major article. And I just thought to myself, I should put that up as part of our religious section, which is what I've done. Of course, it's from the very Reverend late Norman MacLeod, He's one of the Queen Victoria's ministers. So, and then the Highlands of Scotland in 1750. This is a great bit. It's from the manuscript 104 in the King's Library in the British Museum, and it's got a full introduction by Andrew Lang. There's a ton of clan information in there, because bearing in mind that the author of the manuscript was going to Scotland anyway, and the king asked him if he could look into the social conditions and what was happening with the clans in Scotland. Bearing in mind 1750 is after the 46 rebellion. So he was kind of interested in finding out what was going on. And of course, in the preface to the book, it talks about how the fact is obviously against the Jacobites. So it's obviously a biased view, but I think it's got enough factual information that it gives you a bit of a taste and flavour of how things were going in those times. I will say I've never been overly enamoured by clan chiefs, in quotes, because I think a lot of the clan chiefs, after the Battle of Culloden, decided that people were not worth it anymore. I mean, bearing in mind, they used to kind of look after them because the power of the chief came from the number of people he could raise for his armies and various fights and battles. And when obviously the clan strength was wrecked after the Battle of Culloden, they saw them as being pretty useless to them. And so that's why a lot of the Highland clearances happened. And it was obviously a bad time in history, because I've also got a book on the site about Celtic crofting. And the book I have up shows you how stupid, really, that most of the clan chiefs were. They thought they'd do better by clearing the land of people and putting sheep on it. And that was really stupid. And if you read the crofting book that I have on the site, it shows you how each small croft could actually do very well indeed if they'd been shown how to organise their croft better. That they could actually make enough money not only to pay more rent, but to actually do pretty well for themselves. And if you ever were to read that book, 10 Acres Enough, not that all the crofts were 10 acres, but it shows you how you could make a very, very good living off just 10 acres. So by reading that crofting book, reading the 10 Acres Enough book, I think if you read both, you get a real idea of how these crofts could be made to be very, very wealthy, basically, for their owners. So, frankly, I think the clan chiefs were just stupid and ignorant, to be honest. Anyway, as I say, I won't go on that front, but I've always felt, since reading 10 Acres Enough got me going, and then by discovering the crofting book of how a croft could be made to pay well, that's when I realised that the clan chiefs were just stupid. Most of them came from Normandy, of course, so... But they kept a lot of the Highlanders in virtual slavery, and the way they were treated was disgusting. In fact, I think a lot of the slaves in America were treated better than the clan chiefs looked after their people on the land in Scotland. I got quite scunnered about clan chiefs, to be honest. And even today, I don't hold them in very high account at all, on the whole. But anyway, it's because of all that reading and history and research that I think I've come to that view. So anyway, there you go. Highlands of Scotland in 1750. I think it's well worth a read. Next is Scottish Society of Louisville in Kentucky. Got it in the August 2019 newsletter, which you can have a read at. They've got some good stuff in there. Then the Highlander's Friend, I specifically mentioned it. That's the one I was talking about in the introduction about the Gaelic book. So I've given you a link specifically to that book if you can read the Gaelic. or hopefully you'll find either if you can speak Gaelic, then maybe you could do some translation for us. Over time, you don't need to do it all at one go or anything, but maybe take one story and translate it for us. Or if you know of someone that can speak Gaelic, maybe you can ask them to do a translation for us. That would be great. And then the story this week is quite a large one. It's about identity theft. I thought, well, we're all working on the internet all the time, and identity theft is certainly a very serious issue, which we should be totally aware of, and we should take steps to ensure that we're as secure as possible. So this is a Malwarebytes. I've used Malwarebytes for a number of years, as well as Trend antivirus software. And they both seem to work happily together. And so, but Malwarebytes every month usually puts out a newsletter. And in the newsletter there's usually quite a good article or two. And so I thought I'd lift the whole identity theft article because it's very comprehensive. Because I think at the very least you should be aware of what it's all about and be aware of how you can help yourselves. So I thought I'd put the entire article up, but that means it's about 2/3 of the newsletter this week. But anyway, I thought I'd put it up as a mark. So that's really what's in the newsletter this week. And obviously I hope you all have a great weekend when it comes. And obviously in Canada we've got Victoria Day, which means we've got a long weekend coming up. So I hope all our Canadian friends enjoy that. I mean, I must confess I've never really been one for taking local holidays, unless at Christmas and New Year, but that's usually the only ones I bother about, personally speaking. But anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so that's it. Obviously I'd like to hear any comments from you. It'd be great to hear from you. And hopefully we'll have something interesting for you next week as well. Okay, thanks for listening. Have a good weekend. Cheers.